Maleus. The maleus is the largest of the auditory ossicles and is attached to the tympanic membrane. Identifiable parts include the head of the maleus, neck of the maleus, anterior and lateral processes, and handle of the maleus. The head of the maleus is the rounded upper part of the maleus in the epitympanic recess. Its posterior surface articulates with the incus. Inferior to the head of the maleus is the constricted neck of the maleus, and below this are the anterior and lateral processes. The anterior process is attached to the anterior wall of the middle ear by a ligament. The lateral process is attached to the anterior and posterior malleolar folds of the tympanic membrane. The downward extension of the maleus, below the anterior and lateral processes, is the handle of the maleus, which is attached to the tympanic membrane. Incus. The second bone in the series of auditory ossicles is the incus. It consists of the body of the incus and long and short limbs. The enlarged body of the incus articulates with the head of the maleus and is in the epitympanic recess. The long limb extends downward from the body, paralleling the handle of the maleus, and ends by bending medially to articulate with the stapes. The short limb extends posteriorly and is attached by a ligament to the upper posterior wall of the middle ear. Stapes. The stapes is the most medial bone in the osseous chain and is attached to the oval window. It consists of the head of the stapes, anterior and posterior limbs, and the base of the stapes. The head of the stapes is directed laterally and articulates with the long process of the incus. The two limbs separate from each other and attach to the oval base. The base of the stapes fits into the oval window on the labyrinthine wall of the middle ear. Muscles associated with the ossicles. Two muscles are associated with the bony ossicles of the middle ear, the tensor tympani and the stapedius muscle. Tensor tympani. The tensor tympani muscle lies in a bony canal above the pharyngotympanic tube. It originates from the cartilaginous part of the pharyngotympanic tube, the greater wing of the sphenoid, and its own bony canal, and passes through its canal in a posterior direction, ending in a rounded tendon that inserts into the upper part of the handle of the malleus. Innervation of the tensor tympani is by a branch from the mandibular nerve, V3. Contraction of the tensor tympani pulls the handle of the malleus medially. This tenses the tympanic membrane, reducing the force of vibrations in response to loud noises. Stapedius. The stapedius muscle is a very small muscle that originates from inside the pyramidal eminence, which is a small projection on the mastoid wall of the middle. Its tendon emerges from the apex of the pyramidal eminence and passes forward to attach to the posterior surface of the neck of the stapes. The stapedius is innervated by a branch from the facial nerve. Contraction of the stapedius muscle, usually in response to loud noises, pulls the stapes posteriorly and prevents excessive oscillation. Vessels. Numerous arteries supply the structures in the middle ear. The two largest branches are the tympanic branch of the maxillary artery and the mastoid branch of the occipital or posterior auricular arteries. Smaller branches come from the middle meningeal artery, the ascending pharyngeal artery, the artery of the pterygoid canal, and tympanic branches from the internal carotid artery. Venous drainage of the middle ear returns to the pterygoid plexus of veins and the superior petrosal sinus. Innervation. The tympanic plexus innervates the mucous membrane lining the walls and contents of the middle ear, which includes the mastoid area and the pharyngotympanic tube. It is formed by the tympanic nerve, a branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve, and from branches of the internal carotid plexus. The tympanic plexus occurs in the mucous membrane covering the promontory, which is the rounded bulge on the labyrinthine wall of the middle ear. As the glossopharyngeal nerve exits the skull through the jugular foramen, it gives off the tympanic nerve. This branch re-enters the skull through a small foramen and passes through the bone to the middle ear. Once in the middle ear, the tympanic nerve forms the tympanic plexus, along with branches from the plexus of nerves surrounding the internal carotid artery, caroticotympanic nerves. Branches from the tympanic plexus supply the mucous membranes of the middle ear, including the pharyngotympanic tube and the mastoid area. The tympanic plexus also gives off a major branch, the lesser petrosal nerve, which supplies preganglionic parasympathetic fibers to the otic ganglion. The lesser petrosal nerve leaves the area of the promontory, exits the middle ear, travels through the petrous part of the temporal bone, and exits onto the anterior surface of the petrous part of the temporal bone through a hiatus just below the hiatus for the greater petrosal nerve. It continues diagonally across the anterior surface of the temporal bone before exiting the middle cranial fossa through the foramen ovale. Once outside the skull, it enters the otic ganglion,